everyone. Welcome to today's weekly web chat. I'm Darcy Bachigard, and I'm joined today in person right here in Fargo with Amy from Fargo Public Schools, and we're going to talk about project-based learning. Will you tell us about yourself first, Amy? Like, what do you do? What do you do for Fargo Public, and why are you here to talk about PBL?
So I am the district's instructional resources and library program coordinator, and I'm here to talk about PBL for a number of reasons. First of all, because PBL is one avenue, one type of inquiry-based learning, and inquiry-based learning is really important to the work that library media specialists do, but also because I think PBL really can help teachers look for cross-curricular connections to make with their students, and that's something that's always really been a passion of mine.
Our main goal today is to lay out some ideas of where would you start for your project, and both as a learner, like for you as a teacher learner, where might you start just to feel comfortable with project-based learning, but also where would you start the actual project, and like how do you get that off the ground with your students. So everything, as always, for all the resource decks is all linked within here. And I want to start with one question, because this is a brain scratcher I've had as a high school English teacher. I've almost always done projects with my students. Like, we read a book or we read a play, and then the students do a project. And so it's an alternative assessment, like, right, I'm differentiating because they're not just taking a test at the end of the unit. But how is a project different from project-based learning?
Okay, so project-based learning ends up with an end product, a project, but the students actually do their learning through the completion of the project. Okay. So it's not front-loaded teacher content, teacher reading a book, that kind of thing. Whereas if you write a paper, or if you do something like even create a multimedia presentation at the end of your play.
Okay.
That is summarizing the learning that the students have learned. They create a project that summarizes their learning.
Right.
Correct? So project-based learning, the students don't summarize their learning through the project, they actually learn through completing the project.
So there are a couple of resources here on some different ways of thinking about this.
Project, I'm sorry, what was it called? Main course versus dessert project. Yeah. So that I love that article, because it looks at whether or not your project really is focused on the content in the learning, or whether it's kind of a dessert project. So we've done all of our learning now, and now we want to do something fun to wrap it up. So we're going to do this really fun collage to make, to kind of summarize what we did, and it makes students, I mean, it's fun, right? It's a good way to end on a high note.
Right. And it is a good, again, like, it's not that projects themselves are bad.
Absolutely not.
It's simply to make sure you're differentiating that a project is not in and of itself project-based learning. And yeah, if your goal is project-based learning, you need to have a different focus on what you're doing.
Correct. And one of the things that I think about when you said projects aren't bad, projects are not bad at all. I would not want to say that. But for you to just be aware, like, am I intentionally doing a dessert project, and what am I trying to accomplish with that dessert project? Or do I really want to do project-based learning, and what I really have is a dessert project? So for you to be intentional about what you're choosing to do in your classroom is important.
I think that's a very helpful framework of just thinking, as always, we were talking about where do you start in a project, and I think that's a great reminder of where we would start, and that's simply, you would start with, what are you wanting to accomplish? And sometimes what you're wanting to accomplish is served very well by a dessert project. Like, that might really be hitting what you want to accomplish, but if that's not what you're wanting to accomplish, you want to be cognizant of that. And this you touched on in your conversation of what you just said about the dessert versus the actual learning, that this is the difference. A dessert project probably isn't like real life. Like, that's a nice fun project, those are going to be more connected to like a school-based environment. A true project-based learning experience is going to feel more like real life. I love this quote of, it's an in-depth investigation that is worthy of children's attention and effort. And so anything we're doing in the classroom should be about the kids and what is going to help them grow. And I've loved hearing you talk about why project-based learning is so essential to that. I want to get back to this key knowledge, understanding, and success skills. As we're talking about the difference of projects versus project-based learning, can you talk about this little visual and what it means to you?
So these are the essential project design elements from the gold standard PBL that the Buck Institute advocates for. There are different models that different institutes or different organizations have put out, but they're all essentially the same. It's just kind of how they look. So when you look at the key knowledge, understanding, and success skills in this model, and actually this is a revised model. The old model, what was there was 21st century skills. And I actually like that. I mean, but that's what that means, right? So key knowledge and understanding, those are your content standards. And success skills, those are your 21st century skills, your 4 Cs.
Oh, sure. So at the heart, at the center of the project are going to be your essential key understandings, your unit objectives, the main standards that you're covering, and the 21st century skills that students need to utilize in order to complete that project.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes. So that's at the heart of it. I mean, you shouldn't be doing anything in your classroom that's not standards focused or objective focused, right?
Right.
So
and like you said, of like when to choose project, when to choose main course versus dessert, it depends on what are your goals. What are those key knowledge and understandings? Because some of those might have different tools that really work better. And then I love, for me, this looks like some sort of space age door that's like, we'll say that it's opening on the learning process, right? And it's kind of helping us really see those standards and key understandings. It's as if those key knowledge and understandings is just on the other side of the door, and I'm going through some space portal. I'm with Luke Skywalker, and like I'm going through something, and it's opening up so that I can see better what those key knowledge understandings are. Is that just a totally dork metaphor? Or does that make some sense in terms of it helps the students see that learning and that knowledge
in a different way? Yeah, in a more practical, maybe applicable way than what they might. So I had never really thought of it as a door. I had just kind of thought of those being at the center of the learning, but you know, it's a good metaphor. We'll go with it.
And then around that, like what I'm seeing as that door opening are the things that are going to be the essential elements. So can you talk us through some of those and what they mean in regard to this whole process of project-based learning?
Sure. So I'll start up at the top actually with challenging problem or question. This is also known as the driving question as you are creating your project-based learning unit. And so the challenging problem or question is, what is it that the kids are seeking to answer, or what problem are they seeking to solve throughout the course of the project? So one example that I have, a PBL that I've done with some elementary students, is the driving question is, how can we help our school reduce energy consumption?
Very
so
cool.
Then everything that they do in the project is around, how do we use energy, or how much energy do we use? Where is it wasted? Where can we make savings? All of those kinds of things. So they're trying to solve that problem.
I love that that is so real and so practical for those students to actually make an impact on their environment around them. Okay, so sustained inquiry kind of makes sense. I mean, if it's a project, I would suspect that this is something that's going to have a longer duration. It's not like a one-day thing. But can you talk about sustained inquiry for what that means in this context?
Sure. So yes, sustained is the duration thing. Although, I mean, it could be only a day if it's a full-on day. But sustained is about the duration. It's not just a quick one and done kind of a project, or we're gonna do this and stick it in the hallway and it's going to be done at the end of the day.
Or there's going to be just really concrete answers that we're just filling in, like we're answering these questions and we've gathered our knowledge and we're done.
Right.
Like, concrete, done, we're good.
Right.
Yeah.
So it kind of goes back, they play off nicely with one another, the challenging problem or question. Once the students know what their driving question is, I like to do a needs to know with them. So like, okay, so before you can answer that question, what do you need to know?
Yeah.
So then they come up with well, I need to know this, and I need to know this. I need to know how to measure watts or kilowatt hours or whatever. And then you have a list as a teacher of things, of content you might need to teach them.
Sure.
And they have a list of questions that they need to find the answer to.
So to clarify, since you just said I as the teacher may need to teach them, it's okay for me to do direct instruction, even doing a project-based learning experience. Can you talk on that just a little bit?
Yes. I mean, especially depending on the age of your students, you're not just going to say, here's your driving question. Go, right?
And so, good luck.
Of course, you're going to need to do a direct instruction at some point.
Okay.
The key might be, and this can be a little uncomfortable, is you're not exactly sure when that is going to happen. Like, you're going to one day be in class and they're going to be working on the projects and you're going to be, yep, they need to know about kilowatt hours now, So right now, class, we're going to stop working on the project. I need everybody's attention. We're going to learn about kilowatt hours and how to measure kilowatts.
That's very uncomfortable for some of us who are type A personalities who like to have our lesson plans like me. Like I'm one of those, I fully believe in planning backwards and starting at the end and going back. But to do that, I would start at the end of my semester and really block off, like the whole semester of like at least roughly what we were doing on any given day. So I would need to let go of that.
You might need to let go of that a little bit, but you are always going to know. And when you talk about planning, I will say what I think is that project-based learning up front, at least your first few projects, if you're really committed to it, takes more planning.
Okay.
Because then as a teacher at some point your kids aren't going to know about kilowatt hours. There's some kind of content they don't know. At some point you're going to need to do this lesson. You're just not exactly sure when in the course of the project it's going to come up. So, and you do try, you will have a project calendar. If you're a type A personality, you will have a project calendar and you will know it's going to come up this week.
Somewhere in here. So I would be able to have a target. It just might float a little bit.
And that happens anyways in your classroom. If you're paying attention, you're like, I had planned to do this today, but they're really not getting it.
Yeah, and so we need to reteach this thing. Yes. So you're right. It really just reinforces all of those best practices of teaching, that if the kids aren't ready for something or really are ready for something, you do jump around a little bit. And for me as a type A personality, I found that was one of the advantages of having kind of a planned roadmap, because then I found it easier to jump around because I could look and go, oh yeah, it's fine, because I can just borrow time from here and do this. So I like that the PBL would still allow me to do that. And you're right, if you do a needs to know with your students at the beginning, we as teachers kind of have a sense of what they're going to absolutely not have any knowledge of. And so for me, if I'm doing we were talking before that I was trying to rethink how I do research papers and using more of a multimedia, more of an inquiry-based process for students creating things. I know that throughout there, I'm going to have mini lessons where we're going to have to review, all right, how do we critically analyze what's a valid or credible source? I know that some of my standard Englishy lessons are probably going to come up in there, but I also know that I'm probably going to have a different mini lesson that might be more on how to use this podcasting tool. We're going to have a quick 15-minute overview on how to use Audacity because I want you to produce something as part of this project. So you're right, we have a little bit of a sense of what we know, and then by doing a needs to know with the students, we're going to have that baked in.
So if we jump down, actually, I'm going to skip over authenticity right for the start, but if we jump down to student voice and choice, that's kind of where that needs to know comes in. Now, as a teacher, you probably know what they need to know, right? But you really want them to kind of be thinking through that too. Oh, I'm going to need to know this, this, and this. So their voice comes through, and then they can say, oh yeah, we said that was a need to know. So now she's doing direct instruction, and we said we wanted her to do that, right? Because we needed the answer to that
How
question.
much more powerful, though, for as a teacher to have the kids be able to recognize, oh, this is why she's teaching us this.
Yes.
So that's well said. Like, that's a great, beautiful part of that, that if we've done it and it's come from the students, then we're like, see, I have to teach you this now. Right. And it kind of reinforces our message, and I would think makes it much more valuable to them because they've already identified why it's important. And so now they know why they need to know this, and the buy-in is going to be much higher than me just saying, no, you need to know what a credible source is, or you need to know this thing. That's awesome. How else, anything else about the student voice and choice of like, how can we, like, I've decided what the key knowledge and the understandings, like what these standards are that I want the students to explore. So how do I continue to bake in student voice and choice as I go through that process?
You know, I think student voice and choice looks a little bit different from every project, and it will look different for different grade levels too. You know, like an elementary kid, you're not going to say,
do whatever.
Yeah, you can do whatever, you know, but you can say, okay, I want you to do a final presentation. You can use one of these 3 tools. So they can choose maybe which tool they do their presentation with. Where at, you know, the high school level, you might not give them a list of options. You can say, you do a final presentation, whatever that looks like, that's up to you.
Oh, sure.
So there's different, I mean, there are different, in some scenarios, they might be able to choose the topic that they're, you know, as long as it falls within a broad topic, you can choose the narrow scope of your topic.
Sure.
But in some, you know, because of what the content standards are, the narrow
it might
scope
be a
is
little bit
defined
more
for them.
Sure. And so I've seen a couple great presentations that I was like, oh, about water. And is our water safe to drink? Or there was a lovely project that I saw from 2 teachers at Liberty Middle School, maybe Cheney, one of the schools, but they presented at the STEAM conference last spring, and they did a lovely project on exploring, all right, our city needs a new water plant. The students had some choices in terms of what role they took on their project planning teams, because that project they broke into teams, and so then people had to have different jobs within that project. And I could see for my high school kids, when I was talking about this multimedia, the students would have choice on what general topic, because my standards are research skills.
Yes.
So I don't really care, and that's the beauty of being an English teacher. I don't really care what they're researching. The purpose is them researching and then writing. And so that I have the benefit as an English teacher of having pretty broad standards to begin with.
Yeah.
Okay, so lots of different ways that might look. I like to use that analogy, like if you're dealing with a 2-year-old and giving them choice, it might be which color cup do you want your milk in, and you get to choose what color cup you want, not what do you want to drink, 2-year-old. So I might control the ultimate choice of what the child is going to drink, but they can choose what color they want to drink it out of, whereas an older child might have more autonomy in exploring that. Do you want to go back to authenticity, or do you want to, where do you want to take us?
So we'll talk a little bit about authenticity. So one of the great parts of PBL is that it really gives real world application for the standards. So rather than just teaching about how to measure kilowatt hours, like it helps
You're
students
doing it.
really think about, like, why would I ever want to know anything about kilowatt hours? Well, because I'm going to get an electric bill someday, and this is what this means, and this is how you, you know, can control or think about how much your electric bill is going to be, or how you can save on that. So
it makes it so much more, so much more relevant. And then particularly depending on where you're able to build in that student choice, I love how these all do layer on top of each other. That authenticity can really be built off of what the student's interest is or what their passion is, even within that I love that example that you're giving of the how do we save energy, because even within that, there would be, I would think, some different areas of interest. So kids might be focusing on, you know, like slightly different aspects of the school and doing those things. So we've gotten through these things that feel like they're really about the project itself. These last three feel like they're, to me, this is more toward the end. But talk to me about reflection. Is this an ongoing process throughout, or is this like, all right, now we've completed the PBL and now you're going to reflect on the process that you just experienced?
So reflection, I think, should happen periodically throughout the project. And there's a lot of things that the students can reflect on, and that the teacher should be reflecting on too. The teacher really needs to be reflecting on what's working with the project and what changes need to be made. But there's a lot of things that students may reflect on. Some of them might be, if it's a group project or a whole class project, how am I performing as a group member? Am I holding up my end of the deal? You know, some of them may be with our list of needs to knows. You know, we want to go back and look at those. Do we feel, are we reflecting, in our reflection, do we feel like we've really answered those questions, or are we missing some content?
Good. So they're really thinking about their thinking.
Correct.
And thinking about, it's a lot of that metacognition of they're really thinking through, again, reassessing, have I learned what I need to learn? What else am I missing? And so they're constantly going through that evaluation cycle.
And correct. And depending again on the age level that you're dealing with, it might be more teacher guided, or, you know, there might be a graphic organizer or a journal entry where they really capture their reflection. Or, you know, as they get older, it might be maybe a little more subtle, you know, but, you know, it, maybe less teacher directed, but still needs to be incorporated into the project.
Yeah. Okay. And I could see there's so many great ways, even as you were talking about that, like, oh, like that would be really good. Like I could see using Flipgrid. I just spoke to a teacher this morning about Flipgrid, of having, even if it was group projects, having each group kind of report back to the class. This is where we're at. This is where we're stuck. And by each group reflecting on where they're at and what they need to know, the groups may be able to help each other in their process. If it was kind of a group-based project, or if it was a whole class project, the different students would then be able to bounce ideas off of each other. I'm just thinking of some of the things. Again, my brain is thinking of this very selfishly, of the types of projects that I would do, and I didn't always do group-based projects. And usually when I did group-based projects, even there was a lot of individual components within that. But I could see great, a lot of great opportunities for the reflection process to really be building us collaboratively toward those next steps and continuing to help each other solve problems while we're going through that process. And speaking of learning with and from each other, like this critique and revision process feels like, now that you've explained the reflection, feels like it could feed right off of that reflection process.
Yes. So, first of all, I think one of the things that as a teacher, I know that I didn't do enough of, and I know I didn't have my students do enough of, was the reflection. Yeah. And the next thing was critique and revision, right? Like, and kids, I mean, that takes stamina, and we have to build up to that, because kids, they reach an end point and they're like, I'm done. Yep. And you're like, yeah, not so much. You've got a product, right? You've got a product, but could it be better? It could be better, right? You know, so we got to first of all work on building that stamina to still keep going when we and
build that stamina. The stamina that I see frequently is on the part of the critiquer. Yes. Like not just the person being critiqued, but that critiquer of kind of doing blanket praise, right, instead of actual meaningful feedback with the purpose of revision. And so we're going to jump into some of the tools, and I would love for you to point out, like, if there are some tools that Buck Institute provides that helps guide that process, or is this something that teachers, do you have any just general tips of how do we nurture that? Because I agree with you. I did not do enough of this. Yeah. Even as a high school English teacher, where it was essential, like, right, where the revision process is one of our essential understandings. Yes. It's still one of the hardest things to teach students, how to truly provide each other with meaningful feedback.
Okay. So critique, I think one of the things to think about with critique is there's, providing that meaningful feedback. There's two things. One, the teacher can provide meaningful feedback, but the peers can also provide meaningful feedback. So maybe that could actually be something that the students are learning how to do, right? Like how to not just say it's really nice, but there may be some kind of a graphic organizer again, or a template where you say, in this project you need to say 3 things that need improvement with regards to this, and 3 things that you think are really good and that shouldn't go away in the revision process that need to stay. So kind of thinking about, and the teacher should be doing that too,
right.
So they're I'm hoping would be some conferencing, teacher one-on-one or group conferencing together, and then peer conferencing as well.
As an idea, as you were talking about the different ways of doing that, the cult of pedagogy, which we're going to share, and I know I've talked about ad nauseum on these chats. She has a lovely 1-column rubric that she recommends, and there's just 1 column in the middle, and it has the standards, like, right, what are the students supposed to be accomplishing through this? And then there's a blank column to the left that says, above, like really exceeded expectation. And then there's a blank column to the right that says, needs improvement, basically, or whatever is appropriate for your students. Something I think sometimes when I was trying to make the critique more robust and more rigorous, I may have sometimes erred on making the feedback forms too complicated in what was honestly like an honest attempt to get the kids to go deeper. But I do wonder, like, thinking about what you just said and what Jennifer Gonzalez has said on the cult of pedagogy, if maybe for some of these critiques and revisions, if less might not be more. And I love, based on your suggestion of, like, what are 3 things that need to stay, what are 3 things that still need to be worked on, something like that, or this 1-column rubric. And then with the critique expectation that you say, you tell them where have they done something really well, and then you give them feedback with the knowledge that probably right now, where we're all at in the process, probably we're all going to be in the right-hand column still. None of us will be to meets expectations yet because we're not done. And that's part of the process. And we're going to talk about grading and how do we grade projects in a later web chat. But I think that's part of it. And then that project, the student who is being assessed or critiqued, is not penalized for needing improvement, because that's the point of that process. And I've also seen some teachers make that misstep, that students are then, the student who is being critiqued is given a grade based on that critique, which just feels like that's missing the point of that process. So don't fall into that. We have one last thing from this, and then we're going to move into the places to get started for all of this learning. Public product. Why is this an important part? Am I not public enough as a public school teacher?
Well, this ties back to the authenticity piece. Okay, so you would very seldom in the real world write a report just for one person to look at and just go back and write all the little comments in red ink on, right? So you would very seldom do that. When you're in the workforce, the projects that you complete are for public
general consumption.
Right. So it goes back to kind of that. Now, this is also very difficult because you have to think about public a little bit differently. So sometimes in schools that are really focused on PBL, they do a PBL open house night where the kids all have their projects out. It's kind of like a science fair where the parents come, the community comes, and they present their solutions to the problem, or they present their product. But a blog, a website,
that's
a web
published.
chat.
Sure, something that's published out for more people, a podcast,
something
kind of
that somebody other than the teacher or their classmates consumes
as well.
Yeah.
And there are all kinds of great resources for that. I know I've shared before, NPR right now is doing a student podcast challenge where they have all of these resources for teachers that if students create podcasts, there's a contest, and some of those are going to be aired on national public radio. So talk about an authentic audience and big stakes, but lots of ways of doing this with QR codes, of having an interactive gallery. Yes. I know, again, my experience in North Dakota is at West Fargo High School, so a lot of my experiences tie back to there, and I did not do this, but each year was blown away by a project. And it's a little bit, I'm not sure if I would totally put it in the PBL category or because they were using a book as a guide, but students were really exploring the immortal life of Henrietta Lacks. But what they created, each group of students transformed one whole classroom into like a wing of a museum as part of their inquiry process. And so they use the book, I believe, as a springboard into this STEAM process of looking at different aspects of how we do cell biology and all of these different topics. And then the groups would create their own little museum. And then there was an open house night, and you could walk through the different rooms of the museum. So there are big ways of doing that. I know you know Cheryl Baumger at Clara Barton, a third grade teacher. That sounds right to me. And she has shared that they invite in distinguished guests. And so they might do a couple different public, like one day they present to their classmates, one day they present to one group that they've invited in who's maybe working on a similar project. But the part that I loved is they also bring in, she did this great project with her students about reducing food waste. And they brought in the people from the school district and the community that would actually be the deciders, so to speak, the people who actually could truly make and implement some of these student ideas into the school district to benefit more schools than just Clara Barton. And so I liked that she had multiple opportunities for the students to present. So they were working on, as a speech teacher as well as English teacher, that multiple opportunities to do it is very helpful for those kiddos. Yes. But very authentic public audiences of these are the people who would need to hear this information to potentially really do something about this process. Okay, so now I'm like far too excited and fired up. We're going to dive in. So this was a lot of ideas on some of the overview, some of the main ideas. We've talked about this authenticity. My next question, what I want to talk about now, is where do we get started? So where do we get started as teachers, of just where do we get started to really get into this PBL process? And also, where do we start for projects? So let's start first for us as teachers. Where do we start? And these next couple of slides have some different recommendations of where to start, just based on where you're at in the process and also your learning style. So I've mentioned the Cult of Pedagogy. She has a great resource. It's technically one article, but she has it so well layered that you could start there if you just want like one controlled little guide. Edutopia has a beautiful video series. So if you're more of a watcher, like if that's something you want to watch and listen to these videos. Otherwise, we're going to start with probably the most in-depth and thorough starting place, and that's the Buck Institute. And you've already talked about some of the training at the Buck Institute. Where do we go as we go through this site? Like, do you have a recommendation when I'm at the Buck Institute of how do I get started, even as a teacher being here, because there's a lot on this site?
Well, I think how you get started depends on your starting point. Like if
Okay.
you don't know much about PBL and you just are needing to learn more yourself, I think the what is PBL and why PBL area is really good. But if you're looking for resources that are really going to help you get started, that resources tab is really where I think a lot of the planning forms and the documents are. There's also some PD resources, blogs, books, articles, those kinds of things. But under the design area is really where you're going to see the planning forms. There's project search, which wasn't there the last time I looked at that website actually, or looks a little bit different.
It's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
I played around with it just a little bit. I was like, oh, like you can search for projects. But you're right. So if you want to keep learning a bit more, you've got some additional ideas. There are some great video resources. But here's where you're going to dive into. And this is where I was looking. So depending on what type of planner you are, this can give you some ideas of when to go. And how to do this. And I know you have this great book. Yes. If you want to talk to us. So like if you're looking for a place to start, sometimes, as much as I love the convenience of learning online, for me, sometimes I just feel like I'm then getting content in a lot of different places. And for certain topics, it's harder for my brain to organize. So do you want to show, can we just kind of hold up this book a little bit? And you want to talk about why you love this book, which is also from Buck Institute.
Yep, it's also from Buck Institute. And this is PBL in the elementary grades, but there's also a middle school, high school version of this. And I think there's even a third one, getting started with PBL or something more general, not necessarily geared towards a specific level. The PBL starter kit was that.
There is another one. I didn't put it on this page, but links to these books at the Buck Institute are right here. So Amy's going to show us the PBL in the elementary grades, but it's very similar in style to the PBL starter kit for middle school and high school. So just know that if you ordered one of the books, get the one that's appropriate for you, but it's going to look pretty similar.
So one thing about all of the books is they have these spotlight projects, and this is why you want to get the one that's similar or for your grade level, because the spotlight projects, they have a kindergarten spotlight project, they have a first grade spotlight project. Cool. So they really help draw a picture in your mind of what project-based learning is going to look like. I mean, because I've had people say before, like, they can't even read. How am I supposed to do this with them, right? So the spotlight
how do you do this with kindergartners?
The spotlight project kind of gives some examples of how you can get them on board.
Oh, God bless kindergarten teachers, man.
Then the one thing that I really love is there's a form on the website, on the Buck Institute website. It's also in the book, and it is the project overview form. And what I love about the book, if you're a really linear thinker, and I really am, so that's why I love the book, is you get to the end of a chapter and it says, you've read all the theory, and then it says, okay, now that you have this theory, you're ready to plan this part of your project. And it shows you that project overview form, and it shows you the sections that you're able to complete now that you have the theory. So then okay, I've done this, this, and this, and then you hit a spot in the overview that supposedly you're supposed to be able to fill out. And if you're not able to fill it out, then you're like, yeah, I need to learn more about that. So you
could find this by searching for this on Buck Institute, but in our resource deck, and I know I have too many things open, so my computer's a little slow. It's this project overview link under the Buck Institute that will take you to this form. And I like this because if you've dabbled in the PBL waters, this form alone may be enough of a resource to just help you really think through all of that opening door, the kaleidoscope thing of all of those things. And like Amy said, if you get to driving question and you're like, what's a driving question? Some of it is just slightly different terminology. So maybe use something like you know, essential understanding or what is the inquiry question. That might be slightly different, but you can look that part up then and just go from there. So you can download it. But one of the things that is really handy, you can see samples of completed forms. So same thing, if you're just getting started or if you're not quite sure how this looks, you can see what other teachers are doing. There's no need, I feel like sometimes we're too hard on ourselves in education. There's nothing wrong with looking at what other people are doing, because if it's successful for them with their students, chances are it's going to be successful with students, and then you can use it with your students and you can modify things, and it's going to be yours because you're going to teach it and you're going to lead that journey. So even if it's someone else's initial project, it's still going to become yours because you and your kids are going to develop it and take it on the journey. Because I would imagine even if a teacher did the same PBL,
the end result will not be the same.
Right.
That's the beautiful thing about PBL is like the end products are never the same. So here's another, going back to project versus, you know, project-based learning, is there is no right answer. There is no one way to do things, right? So, you know, if I always think back to like when my kids were young, I had twins. They were in separate classes, right? Separate classrooms. I knew they were doing a project if they both came home with the same end product, even though they had different teachers, right?
Okay.
So with project-based learning, that won't happen. So.
Right, because it's going to be much more authentic. It's going to be driven by the student voice and choice. There are going to be things that are going to make it look different. And personally, for me, I think when I was a first or second year teacher, that would have been very uncomfortable for me. Now that's part of what I find very intriguing, because I would think that would help keep the content and those learning objectives from getting stale for me too. And I don't want this to become
what they'll come up with
how much more exciting. Like, I don't want this to be a selfish process of like, oh, this is why PBL is so much better for you as a teacher. And you've already articulated, it is a lot of work. It's a lot more upfront work, but a lot of really good inquiry-based, constructivist-based teaching theories are way more work upfront because you let the students drive where it goes.
The end result is so worth it.
It's so worth it. And I think, like, for me now, after a decade in the classroom, the idea that, oh, like, I have no idea what the kids are going to come, that's part of what is really exciting about this. And
also terrifying.
Also terrifying, but so, so exciting. Because even when I think about the books that we read in class, I've read Lord of the Flies 20 times. I mean, like, who cares what I want to know about that book? Let's dive into some of those thematic topics and explore. And that again would be a project, not a project-based learning experience if I'm using Lord of the Flies. But anytime I can hand it over to what do the kids want to learn and do is so much more entertaining. If we go back here, there are some great planning forms for you to just go through. We looked at some of those. So, you know, all of the phases of the project for different groups of people. I think even this, like, my second question was, you know, like, where do we start if we are ready to start a project? And so this, we've been talking about where do you start to just get your feet wet with the whole project-based learning concept. Some of these forms right here may also be another source of inspiration for some of the different types of assessments that teachers are doing out there.
And you have the project calendar too. I alluded to that a little bit earlier, but if you're a type A personality and you really want to have a pretty good idea about when you're going to be teaching a specific topic, use the project calendar. But also, you know, be flexible.
And that's just good. That's good teaching reminders in general. Use a calendar, have a sense of where you want to go. I always said that even to my students of like, this is a roadmap of what we're going to do, but this is going to change and ebb and flow. I want to dive in, since we're talking about like this next, we're transitioning to kind of where to start. So lots of great resources to help you continue to explore PBL. If you are looking for a project and you don't want to have to do a ton, there's this interesting option called Pen Pals PBL. Have you experienced this?
I have not.
The general idea is that there is a project that is set up and classrooms around the world engage in the inquiry process at the same time, asynchronously, right? Because you would all be working on it at different times, but different projects start. So you can join, and they've kind of created at least the framework of the project. And one of the cool things about this is that then you can collaborate and kind of see what kids in other countries are talking about for similar projects. So that might be, certainly that's scary in terms of like, I have no idea what other kids are going to be talking about. Like, right, like this might not be where you start for your first one. Like you probably want a little bit more control. But once you've gotten this going, if you're ready for something to be really to have an adventure, this is an option for you, this Pen Pals PBL. But I want to give you a few more concrete examples. If you scroll through past the books, you will get, and we'll come back to that, some project ideas. And there are a couple pages here of different projects. I do want to point out, if you're a social studies person, there was this great podcast PD had this lovely conversation about restructuring your entire social studies curriculum into thematic units instead of going chronologically through units. And it was very student-driven, project-based learning just around a theme in history, and students got to research different eras and different things throughout history that interested them connected to that theme. So it was a very different way of studying social studies. And you mentioned cross-curricular. There are some cross-curricular projects in here, an ecology project for social studies and science, some English and social studies, just some general projects in there. But I want to go back to this great metro area PBL site. This was part of the PBL that you, the class that you taught.
That I helped with.
Okay, that you helped with. Yeah, I don't want to give you how dare I give you too much credit.
So there's actually a group of teacher leaders from Moorhead, West Fargo, and Fargo. And I think it's been, last summer, I think was the first summer that we didn't do it, but we held a PBL Institute in the summer, and teachers would come and they would spend 3 days kind of learning about PBL. They would have an immersion in PBL, kind of mini PBL experience themselves. They'd learn about PBL, and then they would design their own project. So these are the projects that they've designed throughout the course of that PBL
And this
Institute.
blows me away, because within each of these areas, if you click and if you go to that, the projects, the different teachers. So these are North Dakota teachers, Moorhead teachers. These are teachers from our region. You can see the general project title, a synopsis of that project. And for most of the projects, there's a link where you can see that project and get some resources and ideas. It has the grade level right there for you. Some of the links may not work depending on what you have access to. So, that might be a hair frustrating. I think it's mostly, you said, the Moorhead.
Yeah, I know the Moorhead ones were created within their learning management system, and we just had a hard time getting access to people outside of the district
for that to speak. However, even if you can't see the project itself, you can still see what they were working on. And again, what's beautiful about it is you could go in and get some ideas for whatever content area. So if you're a K-5 teacher and you're responsible for teaching everything, again, man, I don't know how you all do it. Because I got to switch kids every 50 minutes, like so many different things. But if you're looking for a certain topic area, or you're like, we were talking about where do I start? And for me, I was thinking, well, where is there a unit where maybe I just don't really like how things are going right now, where I don't feel like the students are super engaged, And so I might zoom in on that set of standards, because if we think back to the image that Amy talked us through, those standards and those key understandings are at the center.
Yes.
So that's a great reminder to us that should also be at the center of our planning of a project.
Yeah.
But if I was thinking about, for me, where I would go, like there were certainly some areas, if I looked at my whole curriculum over the course of the year, there were some chunks that after teaching it a couple years, I could go, yeah, I mean, this just isn't working, or the students aren't as engaged as they could be. Like, I know I want to change up this chunk, this 6 weeks that I'm doing, and blow this out of the water and do something different. And so that might be one place where I would start, of like where I want to do a project. But you had some other ideas of places like where might a teacher start for figuring out where to do a PBL in their curriculum?
So I really think that is a good idea, to start with a unit or a topic that you're not, like, either you don't like to teach, the kids don't like, that you're not as engaged in, something that needs some spice, right? But also, if you have a project that you're doing, a summary project that you really like and that the kids seem to like, so can you turn it on its ear a little bit and turn it into project-based learning, because you already really like it, right? Like, it's not going to seem like hard work to make it better, right? So
that's true.
You'll be more invested in it because you already really enjoy that, and the kids already enjoy it. How can you even make it better?
Right.
So that's one way. Another thing you can do is just pay attention to current events in your community and the world.
I like that.
And just say, flooding is happening in the Red River Valley. What can we do about it? What should we do about it? That kind of thing. Bring it kind of to be like a local problem solving.
And you can also, a friend of mine did a mystery Skype with my friend out in Montana did a mystery Skype with a classroom in North Carolina, I believe. And as part of that conversation, so this was a very organic, but talk about, I really respect this teacher for taking a current event, so to speak. The kids in North Carolina were shocked at how cold it could be for the kids in Montana to still go outside for recess. And they were visiting in the fall, but I think in North Carolina, the cutoff for going outside for recess is 32, it's freezing. And so those kids were like, you go outside when it's 0? I mean, I think they were 3rd or 4th graders. Yep. So that class, based off of that conversation, the teacher had the students do a relatively short project-based learning experience where they researched some of the weather in Montana, where they researched what would be some of the needs for students, particularly kids who might not have as much money as other kids. And that group of 4th graders raised money and purchased boxes of hats and mittens that they then sent to a group home specifically for homeless children in Montana, so that those kids would be warm at recess. And I just thought that was a really cool, and that teacher obviously had no idea that that was going to be an area of interest that came out of a random mystery Skype conversation. Right. But I really respect that teacher saw that the kids were really engaged in that topic.
Speaking of voice and choice, right?
Yes, and authentic audience. I mean, like they created, and so they didn't, I wouldn't say that it was complete project-based learning. They didn't have like a big project at the end. It was maybe like a mini project, but it ticks a lot of those boxes off of what they were doing. And it was very much, it became this service. So they were researching the climate, they were researching different, like, what do you need for protective wear, and like what those things were. And more than anything, the kids were really authentically engaged. And so they gave a service. So I like that flooding idea of what is going on, or what are the topics that kids are excited about and that are just getting, what are you hearing them about? And if I think back to some of the things, maybe not everything, maybe bottle flipping is, I don't know, but maybe there's a great lesson off of bottle flipping about forces and like how different how you could study the laws of motion. And
not a physics person.
I'm not either. And so I have no idea. But between the bottle flipping and fidget spinners were both things at the same time. And you have sparked so many ideas of what if we also just paid attention to our students of what are the trends that we're seeing? And is there a way for us to help them look at what is popular in their own culture in a more academic or critical way? Which would be my next suggestion. If you're thinking about projects, for me, a big regret would be at the end of the year for seniors or juniors, whichever group, I could just ask the kids.
Well, one other thing I would say for teachers to think that kind of something that I use is, regardless of whether it's a unit they struggle with teaching or a unit that they love teaching, I go back to that model. You know how all those elements overlap. It's kind of sneaky, but they all overlap. But I say, okay, so you've got this unit. What are you already? Which of these elements are already covered? Oh, we got voice and choice covered, and we've got public audience covered. Whatever.
Right.
Okay, so pick two more elements from that. They overlap, so eventually everything ends up getting beefed up. But pick two more elements that you're really going to work on incorporating. So we're really going to incorporate reflection and critique and revision now. So then you got 4 of the elements covered, and it's maybe not a full-blown project-based learning, but it's on the road, and you're scaffolding the teacher learning and the teacher practice too,
That's a great tip and a great freedom, so that if I'm just feeling like this is too much. Right. I love that you're giving teachers that permission. Then maybe for your first time out, don't worry about making all 6 of those back to that visual. Don't worry about hitting every single thing. I love that. Take something that you're already doing that does a couple of those things and then build in a couple more layers. And then next year, when you do it again, add in 1 more layer. And
because they're so interrelated, before you know it,
you're going to be doing
right?
them. Right.
So, yeah.
I want to just close with this John Spencer image of why we want to be doing PBL in the classroom. Like, why is this an important journey? I talked selfishly for why I think that this is an exciting avenue for keeping the practice fresh for me. But this is a lovely little visual that he has of what students gain. Yes, they're going to gain that knowledge that Amy pointed out is at the center. They're going to get that content knowledge, but there's so much more that students gain from this process. And these, to me, really are a great visual of those success skills, of those 21st century skills. They get to do all of these things. And I feel like if we can empower, what a difference it could make if we made every kid feel like they are truly a problem solver. What impact could that have on our society? If students truly felt like they had the voice and the agency and the authentic audience to tackle real world problems in our society, what would happen 20 years from now if every child grew up learning that process and being empowered in that way? What a difference could we have as educators for the whole trajectory of everything? Because ultimately that's what we need, right? Yes. We need people who are going to solve problems. Whether they're solving them as a plumber or an astronaut or as one of the myriad careers that don't exist yet.
Out there.
Right. Or the myriad problems that exist in our society. We need problem solvers. We need thinkers, people who are system thinkers and are hackers and rebels and explorers in the best possible way. Yeah, it's more work. It's going to be more work. It's going to be uncomfortable. It might be messy, but man, it's so worth it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Give up control and give it a try.
Thanks for giving us that opening into where we might start projects and a lot of really concrete tools to get us started.
Well, great. I look forward to seeing the rest of the episodes that go along with it.
Fantastic. So thanks everyone. I'm excited to hear about your projects and where you're going to take your project-based learning journey, whether it's your personal project-based learning through these web chats as you're continuing your learning and exploring what interests you, and then of course where you take that with your students. So thanks everybody, and we'll see you next time.